The text arrived while my father was pouring wine. We were out on the dock of his Muskoka cottage, the one he always called our cottage, though I had never once been invited to choose the curtains or pick the paint color or do any of the thousand small things that turn a house into a home. The sun was going down over the lake. Dragonflies skimmed the water. My half-sister was laughing at something my stepmother had whispered to her, their heads bent together the way they always did when they wanted to signal that some joke was happening just beyond my reach. My phone buzzed against my thigh. Unknown number, the message was 3 sentences. Don't sign whatever they put in front of you tonight. Drive back to the city, don't tell them you're leaving. I set my phone face down on my knee and watched my father settle back into his Adirondack chair. He looked relaxed. He always looked relaxed when he had already won. My name is Maren. I am 36 years old. I am a chartered professional accountant specializing in forensic auditing, which means I spend most of my working hours inside other people's financial disasters, tracing shell companies through offshore directories, finding the $14 discrepancy that unravels a $12 million fraud, following money through the dark places people think no one will ever look. I am very good at my job. It took me 23 years to realize I had been applying it everywhere except inside my own family. Before I go any further, tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. And if any part of this story sounds like something you have lived through, hit like. I promise you are not alone. My mother died of ovarian cancer when I was 4 years old. She was a pharmaceutical research scientist at a biotech firm in Waterloo, Ontario. Before she passed, she had co-developed a patent for a targeted drug delivery mechanism, the kind of foundational technology that ends up baked into treatments you've never heard of but your body has quietly benefited from. She placed the licensing rights into an irrevocable trust, with me as the sole beneficiary. Her estate lawyer structured it so the trust would fully vest and pass entirely into my control on my 36th birthday. My father told me she left nothing. He said she had spent everything on her medical bills and that there was a small life insurance policy that barely covered the funeral. He said this so many times and for so many years that I stopped questioning it. I was sent away at 13. My stepmother and my father, I had shoved my half-sister down the back staircase of our house in Oakville. My half-sister cried convincingly. I had not touched her, but I was a teenager and she was 11 and I had no evidence and no one who was inclined to believe me. 3 weeks later, I was driven 4 hours north to a wilderness therapy program in the Temagami region and left there for 8 months. I am not going to describe what those 8 months were like. That is a different story for a different night. What matters is that when I came home, I was not the same girl who had left, and over the years that followed, through university, through articling, through building a quiet, independent life in a condo in East Toronto, I had convinced myself that the damage was survivable, that I had outrun it. That evening on the dock, I understood I had never left it behind at all. My father cleared his throat. He reached into the leather bag beside his chair and pulled out a manila envelope, the kind that looked deliberately ordinary. The kind of packaging that says nothing to see here while containing exactly everything to see. Since we're all together, he said, there's some paperwork I'd like to run through. Estate restructuring. Our solicitor put it together to reduce probate exposure before the end of the fiscal year. Quite standard. My stepmother was already nodding along. My half-sister was staring at her phone, but there was a tension in her jaw that hadn't been there 10 minutes earlier. I am a forensic auditor. I have reviewed thousands of documents. The phrase quite standard is, in my professional experience, almost never followed by something quite standard. I opened the envelope. It took me less than 90 seconds to find what I was looking for. Irrevocable assignment of beneficial interest. Full relinquishment of claim to the Holloway family trust. The undersigned acknowledges no outstanding entitlement to income, principal or accumulated distributions. Holloway, my mother's maiden name. What trust is this? I asked. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. My father made a dismissive gesture with his wine glass. A legacy vehicle your grandfather set up years ago. There are tax implications tied to your name being on it, purely administrative. There is a trust in my name, I said slowly, with accumulated distributions. Maren, my stepmother's voice had the particular edge she used when she wanted to signal I was being embarrassing. This is a family holiday, can we not do this? My half-sister looked up from her phone. Just sign it. You've never cared about any of this before. My father leaned forward. I have a conference call at 8. I need this resolved tonight. Yellow sticky tabs on the signature lines. A heavy silver pen placed precisely parallel to the edge of the paper. The whole setup had the practiced ease of something that had been staged well in advance. I needed time. I looked up at the three of them and said very quietly that I needed to use the bathroom. My stepmother's expression flickered just for a second, then she smiled. Of course, don't be long. I walked up the dock, through the screen door into the cottage. I kept walking until I reached the bathroom at the end of the hall, and I locked the door behind me, and I sat on the edge of the tub and looked at my phone. I typed back to the unknown number, "Who are you?" The three dots appeared, then Soren. "Meet me at the Tim Hortons on Bracebridge Main Street. Take the kayak around the point to the public launch. I'll have a car waiting. Come now." I stared at the message. Soren was my half-sister's husband. He was an urban planner, Métis, originally from Winnipeg, quiet and deeply decent in the way my family never seemed to know what to do with. At my stepmother's charity galas, my father liked to introduce him to donors as though Soren were a credential, a proof of progressiveness. I had watched Soren accept these introductions with a careful, unreadable smile for 4 years. I had always wondered what was underneath it. I flushed the toilet for the sake of noise. Then I walked back through the cottage, out the front door, not the back, not the dock, and found the kayak my father kept tied at the side of the property. I untied it, got in, and paddled around the point without looking back. I did not say goodbye, I did not take my bag. I left my half-empty glass of Niagara Pinot Noir sitting on the dock railing. Soren was waiting in a dark green Subaru in the parking lot of the Tim Hortons. He had 2 large coffees in the cup holder, and the look of a man who had spent weeks rehearsing this conversation and still did not know how to start it. "I found something in the boathouse," he said before I could speak. 3 weeks ago. I was looking for an inflatable for the kids. There's an old filing cabinet back behind the canoe rack. I don't think your father remembered it was there." He reached into the back seat and placed a cardboard shoebox on my knees. Inside were papers, financial records, letters on legal letterhead going back more than 2 decades. "I made copies," Soren said. "Everything in that box is a copy. The originals are still in the cabinet." I started reading. It took me 40 minutes, sitting in that parking lot while the fluorescent glow of the Tim Hortons lit up the windshield, to understand what I was looking at. Soren sat quietly beside me and let me work. He was the only person in my life who had ever done that. Simply let me think without trying to interpret the silence. My mother's pharmaceutical patent had generated licensing royalties from 7 companies across 3 countries for nearly 3 decades. The trust she established had accumulated, as of the most recent statement in the box, slightly over $26 million. My father had known about it since the day she died. He had been appointed trustee. He had filed a series of declarations with the Ontario courts, 3 times at roughly 8-year intervals, stating that I was psychologically unfit to manage my own affairs. The first filing was made when I was 13 years old. It was accompanied by an assessment from a private psychologist describing me as displaying severe emotional dysregulation, an inability to distinguish reality from fabrication, and a pattern of violent behavior toward family members. The psychologist's name appeared in my father's personal address book, which was also in the shoebox. He had not sent me away to help me. He had sent me away to obtain the documentation he needed to have me declared legally incompetent, so he could maintain control of a trust that was not his. The guardianship declarations had been renewed twice since. If left unchallenged, the trust would have continued to sit under his authority indefinitely. The only reason tonight's signing mattered was that the court filing required my signature as evidence of informed consent. Without it, the transfer was legally incomplete. My 36th birthday was 27 days away. "How long have you known?" I asked Soren. 3 weeks, he said. "I've been sitting with it." He paused. "Your half-sister doesn't know the full picture. She knows your father manages some kind of estate on your behalf. She's always been told you lacked the capacity." He stopped again. "She's not a good person, but I don't think she knows the extent of what he's done." "What does she know about her hotel business?" His jaw tightened. He pulled up documents on his phone. The seed capital for my half-sister's boutique hotel chain, 3 properties in Ontario, 1 in British Columbia, had come from a numbered company in Alberta. That numbered company had received its initial funding from a holding entity in the Cayman Islands. That holding entity's operating capital had originated from the Holloway Family Trust. My half-sister had built her entire business on my mother's money. She had been told it was a private investment from a silent partner. She had been told not to ask questions about the source. She's planning to list on the TSX Venture Exchange, I said. It wasn't a question. I had seen the papers at the cottage. The investor meeting my stepmother kept referencing was the equity raise. The prospectus drops in 6 weeks, Soren said. She has a lead investor, private equity out of Calgary. If the source of her seed capital comes out during due diligence, she files a false prospectus, I said. The OSC pulls the listing and she's liable for securities fraud. Your father needs your signature on that waiver before she files, Soren said. Once the trust is transferred out of your name, the connection to the capital source disappears. Clean chain of title. I looked at the shoebox. I want you to take this to whoever you trust, Soren said, and I want to go back to that cottage tonight and act like I drove into town for milk. You're going back there? I have 2 kids in that cottage. His voice was very even, and I need to be standing inside the house when this comes apart. Something shifted in the way I looked at him. He was not doing this for me. He was doing this for his children, and because he was, at his core, a man who could not remain in the same room as injustice once he had seen it clearly, I had built my entire career out of exactly that quality. Be careful, I said. Don't sign anything, he said. I drove the 4 hours back to Toronto that night. I arrived at my apartment at 2 in the morning, made a pot of coffee, spread the copied documents across my kitchen table, and went to work. Forensic auditing is not glamorous. It is not dramatic confrontations and sudden revelations. It is routing numbers. It is a $15 discrepancy appearing in the same column every quarter until you realize it is not a rounding error. It is a theft. I spent 3 days inside those records. By the end of the 3rd day, I had mapped 23 years of systematic fraud into a 17-page document. On the 4th morning, I called a colleague, a woman I had worked alongside on a competition bureau file 3 years earlier, who now handled financial crimes matters with the RCMP. I told her I had something she needed to see in person. She came that afternoon with a junior officer and a laptop. I walked them through the document. I watched the junior officer's expression change around page 4 and not recover. The colleague looked up from page 12. We're going to need an estate litigator. His name was Thorne. He had a Bay Street office and the specific calm of a man who had seen every variety of family catastrophe and stopped being surprised by any of them. He reviewed my 17 pages in 40 minutes without speaking. Then he looked up and said, "We need to move before your father realizes you haven't come back to sign." Thorne filed an emergency protective order with the Ontario Superior Court, placing the trust assets under court supervision while the investigation proceeded. The filing was sealed. My father's solicitor would not see it. My father would not see it. Under the terms of that order, any instrument purporting to transfer beneficial interest in the Holloway Family Trust, executed after the filing date, was automatically void and unenforceable. Whatever I signed at the solicitor's office would be legally meaningless before I picked up the pen. But my father did not know the order existed. He believed he was one signature away from $26 million. Which meant that when he called me 11 days later, his voice warm and practiced and entirely artificial, I knew exactly what to say. I've been thinking, I told him. You're right, I don't want to make things difficult. Can we do the signing at your solicitor's office? I'd feel better with the notarization done properly. There was a pause, 1 beat too long. Of course, my father said, Wednesday. Wednesday worked. I spent Tuesday evening at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, reviewing the exact layout of my father's solicitor's document. Thorne had prepared a second instrument, an audit authorization granting me, in my capacity as trust beneficiary, the right to demand a full accounting of all assets and distributions from the trustee. It was 12 lines long, same formatting as my father's waiver, same weight of paper, same font. I practiced the swap on my kitchen table 17 times before I was satisfied. The solicitor's office was on King Street West, 41st floor. My father was already seated when I arrived, early, which meant nervous. My stepmother had her reading glasses on. My half-sister was in the corner on her phone. The whole tableau had the arranged quality of a stage set. The solicitor slid the documents across the table. Yellow tabs, a pen parallel to the edge of the paper. I let my hands tremble, not dramatically, just enough. I just want to make sure this is the right thing, I said. I let my voice sound smaller than it was. I've been anxious all week. My stepmother made a soft sound of theatrical sympathy. My father placed his hand over mine. This is the right thing, he said, for everyone. My half-sister looked up for exactly 3 seconds, nodded, looked back down. I reached for the water glass at the center of the table. I knocked it over. It was not graceful, it was not supposed to be. Cold water spread across the granite in a fast arc toward my stepmother's lap. She shoved her chair back sharply. My father grabbed for the document stack. The solicitor turned to the credenza behind him for paper towels. My half-sister stood up, pulling her blazer away from the splash. 7 seconds. I slid the audit authorization from inside the folder resting against my left knee. I placed it on the solicitor's notary pad, beneath the waiver's final page. I signed the waiver clearly and slowly, a signature my father could read from across the table. Then, with the same pen, I signed the audit authorization in bold and deliberate strokes. When the solicitor turned back around, still blotting water from his sleeve, I gave him a small apologetic smile and gestured at the notary pad. He picked up his stamp without looking, pressed it down firmly, set the pad aside. I left the waiver on the table. I tucked the notarized audit authorization back into my folder. "I'm so sorry," I said. "Is everything all right?" My father was already looking at his phone. My stepmother was not speaking to me. My half-sister had gone back to her corner. I shook the solicitor's hand. I took the elevator down 41 floors. I walked out onto King Street into the gray October afternoon and found a bench on a corner and sat down and did not move for approximately 4 minutes. Then I called Thorne. "I have it," I said. "Filing the authorization with the court this afternoon," he said. "The RCMP will execute the freeze order tonight." My half-sister's investor gala was in 9 days. She had rented a rooftop venue in the financial district. The lead investor from Calgary was flying in. 3 OSC compliance officers were on the guest list as courtesy invitations. She had ordered champagne from a Niagara winery and a catered spread from a restaurant with a 4-month waitlist. She had spent weeks building the presentation of a self-made woman about to take her business to the next level. She had no idea the foundation had already been pulled out from under her. I arrived at the gala at 7:45. I wore a charcoal blazer and my court appearance heels. Soren had quietly removed my name from the venue's restricted list that afternoon. He was already inside, standing near the bar with the expression of a man who has counted down the last hours of a particular chapter and is ready for it to end. My half-sister saw me before I reached the main space. For a moment her face did something complicated. Surprise, then calculated recovery, then the reflexive warmth of a woman who understood that her most important investors were watching. She came toward me with her arms slightly open. "I didn't know you were coming," she said, her voice bright and brittle at once. "I wanted to see it," I said. She searched my face for something and did not find it. She pivoted to the nearest cluster of guests and introduced me as her older sister, the accountant, always working too hard. A few people smiled politely. The lead investor from Calgary gave me a firm handshake and told me the boutique hotel concept was a remarkable opportunity. "It really is compelling," I said. "I was reading through the prospectus draft last week. The seed capital structure is interesting. The Cayman holding vehicle, I noticed in the Alberta disclosure that the entity's operating capital was classified as a discretionary distribution from an Ontario Inter Vivos trust." I tilted my head slightly. "Your legal team has confirmed that the beneficiary's assignment of interest was executed before the trust assets were placed under a superior court protective order, I assume? Because an assignment executed after a protective order is filed is void under Ontario law. Which would mean the senior creditor on the capitalization table isn't your holding company, it's the trust beneficiary." The handshake had long since ended. He was very still. "I'm sure it's nothing," I said. "I'm sure your lawyers have already looked at all of this." I watched him excuse himself. I watched him find his associates near the window. I watched the body language shift, the quick lean in, the heads coming together, the quiet pull toward the door. My father found me 12 minutes later. His face was a controlled surface over something underneath that was not controlled at all. He gripped my elbow and moved me toward a quieter corner. "What did you say to him?" I was talking about the prospectus, I said. Maren, he stopped, his jaw worked once. Whatever you think you have found. I know what is in the trust statements, I said. I know what is in the court filings. I know about the psychologist in your address book and the declaration you filed when I was 13 years old. I know about the Alberta numbered company and the Cayman entity. I kept my voice low and even. And 10 days ago, I filed an audit authorization with the Ontario Superior Court, granting me full accounting rights over every dollar that has moved through the Holloway Family Trust since the day my mother died. The protective order was filed the same day. The waiver you watched me sign at the solicitor's office is void. The freeze on all associated accounts took effect at 9 o'clock this evening. He stared at me. You should step outside, I said, before the RCMP comes in. He did not move. He stood looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not calculation, not anger. Something older than both. Something that might, in a very different version of this story, have been grief. I turned away and walked toward the stage. My half-sister was in the middle of her opening remarks when I stepped up beside her. She turned startled. I held my hand out for the microphone, and something in my face made her give it to me. It was the first time in my life she had ever handed me something without being asked twice. I looked out at the room. I found Soren near the back, standing very still. I found the lead investor from Calgary poised at the door. I found 3 OSSE officers who had shifted from relaxed to watchful. I'm Maren, I said. I'm a CPA. I specialize in forensic auditing. I've spent the last 3 weeks reviewing the financial records of the trusts that capitalize this business, and I have a professional obligation to tell you that the prospectus in front of you does not accurately represent the legal status of those assets. I nodded at Soren. He walked to the AV booth and plugged in a drive. The corporate slide behind me disappeared, replaced by a flowchart I had built over 3 days of very little sleep. It showed the trust, it showed the Cayman entity, it showed the Alberta company, it showed the hotel chain, it showed the date of the protective order. It showed, in clean accounting notation, exactly what had happened to $26 million across 23 years. The room went quiet in the particular way that rooms full of people with a great deal to lose go quiet. My father walked toward the elevator lobby. He made it as far as the doors before 2 RCMP officers stepped forward. My stepmother tried a service exit near the bar. It was covered. My half-sister did not run. She stood at the base of the stage and watched the flowchart on the screen and went very pale, and then slowly sat down on the stage edge with her hands in her lap. She looked like someone being handed a truth she had worked extremely hard never to have to hold. The RCMP officers were quiet and efficient. They were not theatrical about it. Handcuffs went on. My father said something as they walked him past. I could not hear it over the ambient sound of 200 people reaching for their phones. Soren found me near the A booth when it was done. He had a blue-backed folder in his hands. He held it out. I filed the divorce papers this morning, he said, and the custody application. My kids are with my sister in Winnipeg. I took a breath. Are you okay? I will be, he said. Are you? I thought about my mother's name on a patent I had never been allowed to see. I thought about 8 months in the Temagami bush at age 13, crying myself to sleep in a canvas tent because no one was coming to tell me it had all been a mistake. I thought about 11 years of building expertise in finding what people hide, and never once turning it toward the one question that had mattered most. Getting there, I said. The months that followed were unglamorous and necessary. My father and stepmother were charged with breach of fiduciary duty, fraud over $5,000, and obstruction of justice. The private psychologist who had signed the false assessment surrendered his license and cooperated with the prosecution in exchange for a reduced penalty. My father's solicitor retained his own counsel and stopped returning calls the week the charges were announced. They pleaded guilty 8 months later. My father received a 4-year federal sentence. My stepmother received 2 years less a day. My half-sister was not charged. The evidence supported that she had been told the source of her capital was a legitimate private investment, and that she had not asked the questions she perhaps should have asked. Her hotel chain collapsed when the prospectus was withdrawn, and the lead investor pulled out entirely. She moved to Prince Edward Island. I have not spoken to her since the gala. I do not know if I ever will. That is a ledger I am not ready to balance yet. The trust, all $26 million, plus compounded interest from the preceding 2 decades, was transferred into my sole control under court supervision. Thorne helped me establish a proper trustee structure with an independent administrator. I did not put the money in a single account. I am a forensic auditor. I know what happens to people who treat a windfall as a conclusion. I set aside $500,000 in an educational trust for Sun's 2 children, structured so that neither parent could touch the principal. Soren called me when the paperwork arrived. He said he couldn't accept it. I told him it wasn't an offer. He laughed, the first time I had heard him laugh in months, and it sounded exactly like relief. I bought a house on Vancouver Island. It is small and faces the ocean, and the mortgage is comfortable. There is a room I have converted into a home office with a standing desk and a view of the water, and I do my best work there in the early mornings before the rest of the world catches up. A few months after I moved in, I found a photograph of my mother in a box I hadn't opened since university. She is young in it, early 30s, holding a printout in a lab, smiling at whoever is behind the camera. She looks like someone who expected her work to outlast her in the best possible way. It did. She just could not have known how long it would take to reach me. I put the photo in a frame and set it on my desk, and every morning before I open the first file of the day, I look at it for exactly 1 minute, and remember that the most important audit I ever ran started on a dock in Muskoka with a glass of stolen wine and a text message from a decent man in a parking lot. The ledger is balanced, the account is closed. I have never been so sure of anything in my life.